for joining us today for this IRB bootcamp. It's really nice to see everyone here. So this will be kind of a general overview of IRB processes and some of the things that we do, and then we will go ahead and we should have some time for questions at the end. So my name's Lauren. This is my contact info. It's here. It'll also be at the end of the presentation. So the slides are going to be online, and I believe the video will also be online too. So you don't feel like you have to take notes or anything now. You'll be able to access all the materials later. There's a lot of hyperlinks in this particular presentation too. So you'll be able to access the resources on your computer after we are done. So kind of a general overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll be talking about some submission processes, sort of generally, requested review types, how to get a strong submission going, tracking progress, responding to review, contacting the IRB, and then there's some resources at the end that will be helpful for you all moving forward. So first of all, just as a sort of a general thing, what is the IRB? So we're the Institutional Review Board, and our job here is to review research that involves human subjects. Predominantly, the IRB is focused on the ethics of research and compliance with law, policy, regulations. There are other institutions or other committees at UF that also review research. Those have slightly different roles. We do work with them very, very closely. But as I said, they have different things that they're looking for when they go through their reviews of studies. We are the main one that talks about policies and ensuring that we're complying with federal law, state law, local policies. So we have two main IRBs here, IRB 01 and IRB 02. There are other places that you can submit your research. WIRB is an external IRB. There's also various different ways of submitting through a single IRB. So if you have a multi-site study with federal funding, you'll be likely submitting through that, not exclusively. But today we're mainly going to talk about IRB 01 and IRB 02. The others we'll be able to cover at a later session. So this is kind of a general overview of the IRBs and what specifically they do. IRB 01 is sort of the major biomedical IRB. So if you're doing research on drugs or devices, if you're doing things that involve collecting medical information on anybody, this will be the IRB that you're going to be submitting to. IRB 02 is social and behavioral research. So things that involve questionnaires or surveys. If you're sending out an email and it has a survey link in it and you're asking about attitudes towards the media or attitudes towards conservation, things like that, that'll probably be going to IRB 02. So this is one of the bigger differences between the two is sort of this type of research. But again, you can do a lot of different things through the system, and we're always happy to help you figure out where you need to submit if that's something that you need. So getting started. In order to use our system, this is all going to be done online. It's really nice because we have a single place where you can submit your studies, you can track them, you can look at your different documents, you can upload things. But before you can do that, you have to get started. So the first step is to register for myIRB and complete required training. So IRB 803 is required for everybody who's going to be on a study. This is sort of the general IRB training. If you are on specific studies, you may also be required to have HIPAA training or good clinical practice training. HIPAA is usually for undergraduates who are going to be accessing health info. And then good clinical practice is typically for funding that comes from the federal government. There's specific types of studies and types of funders that require that. And that'll all be something that will be explained. We'll help you out with that. Your funder will probably help you out with that. There's various ways you can get to figure that out. So registering for myIRB, the myIRB button is up here on the top of our website. That will take you to the page. Required trainings, it's right here on the left-hand side, and it'll have more information about the different kinds of trainings that you might encounter and you might need. to use myIRB, the first thing you have to do is you have to set up our VPN. So this is if you're not in the Health Sciences Center. The way the system is set up right now, you need a VPN to get into it to make sure that the system is really secure. If you go to the myIRB page, so if you click up here on myIRB, it'll take you down here. And then at the very bottom, there's information about how to make sure that you're connected to the VPN, how to make sure that everything is set up. So setting up the VPN is something that you'll do. You'll download it and you'll set it up on your computer once. And then whenever you need to access the website, you'll log in through the VPN, and that'll make sure that you can get into the system. So fair warning, if you try and access myIRB and you're not using the VPN and you're not in the Health Sciences Center, you will get an error message. The page will just say it can't be loaded. Don't worry, that doesn't mean that the site's down. It just means something probably happened to your VPN. You may need to log in again, double check the internet, make sure that it's flowing through there. And of course, if there's other issues with myIRB and you're already connected to the VPN, feel free to contact us. We recommend that everybody take a look at the researcher manual. It's really useful. It's a step-by-step guide for going through myIRB. We have screenshots of all of the different forms. We have further information about the types of stuff that you'll be asked to do. So it's a really nice resource. It's a PDF. You can download it, save it to your computer, and refer back to it as needed. We also have a tool that is one of my favorites, is the sandbox. So within the myIRB system, there are a variety of smart forms that you'll be asked to fill out. Sometimes there are questions that are required. And so the system isn't going to let you move forward and go to the next page unless you fill it out. If you're like me, I like to have all of the information ready and set, and then I just go into the system and fill something out. So if you want to make sure that if you want to go through and sort of do a practice IRB submission, you'll go to the sandbox. It mirrors our website, and you'll be able to create a study and go through the forms, check out different things, see what the different pathways are, get all the information you're going to need. And then it doesn't submit. It's not an actual study. It's just a place to learn. So instead of creating a study and then having it be something that you're not actually going to submit and going through that process, the sandbox is a really nice, really easy way of getting familiar with the system and making sure that all of your documents are in a row before you start going through it for real. And of course, we have technical assistance. You can give our IT team an email. They're really very responsive. They're very nice, and they'll be able to help you out if there's technical issues with myIRB. You can also contact our main office. We don't generally handle the technical aspects of it, but we will be able to point you in the right direction. So when you register for myIRB, you'll be asked to provide researcher roles, your titles, your department affiliations, and that will stay in the myIRB system sort of in the back end. So if you need to update that at a later date, these are the people that you'll contact. They'll be able to update that system setting for you, and you'll be good to go. So the first thing I want to talk about is requested review type. So when you go into myIRB, we have a variety of different forms. The system is designed to be really adaptive to respond to the type of research that you're doing. But that also means that you can get on different paths for your submission to go through the system, depending on what you check. It'll bring in different forms. So knowing what requested review type you want to use, if possible, is a good way to make sure that you're on the right pathway and you have the smart forms and the information that you need. The different review types cover different types of studies, have different restrictions, different information requirements. So it just helps get the review done quickly and efficiently, and it also helps you because you know exactly what you need to provide. So we have a variety of different requested review types. We do have an investigator guideline on getting the correct requested review type. We have information on our website about that. So we'll go through these in brief, but there are resources online that will be able to help you. So non-human research. This is sort of one of the big things that we see. A lot of students use data sets that are out there. There's a lot of people who use these data sets. So non-human research is if you're receiving de-identified samples or data for analysis. In order to determine whether research is actually non-human, that's something that a reviewer is going to make a determination on. So all research where you're getting information from someone else, you'll submit that to us. It's a little bit different than some other IRBs, other institutions. Some of them don't do this, but we go ahead and ask that you submit that, and then we go through and make sure that everything is correct for that pathway. So one of the things that can be a little bit tricky is de-identified data versus coded data. So when we talk about identifiers, we're talking about information that could link a subject back to their identity in the real world. This does include dates. So a lot of the times you'll get information, and if it contains a birthday, with the right other information, that could easily link somebody back to their identity in sort of the external non-research world. So dates are something that if you're using de-identified data, it can't have dates. De-identified data means you don't have any way to link back to these identifiers. A lot of the times though, data is actually coded. So this means that there is a key or a code that links it back to the identifiable data. Sometimes it's held by you, sometimes it's held by whoever gave you the data set. And essentially, if you have a data set and it has PHI or education records or survey records, and then there's either another spreadsheet or another system, and it contains a code, participant 1 links to this name or this MRN, participant 2. Even if it's stored separately, it's considered coded. It's not completely de-identified, because if you had that code, you would still be able to link people back to their identities. And so this will require a confidentiality agreement. This is something, again, that when you go ahead and submit, IRB staff and the reviewers will be able to help you out with this, but just keep it in mind, the difference between these two. So next up is exempt research. So exempt research can involve contact with subjects, but the risks to subjects are minimal. So a lot of educational studies, observational studies, things like that fall into this category. If you're going to be observing people out in public, or if you're going to be observing people as they go through a specific process, that might be considered exempt research. So consent may be required for something like this. A lot of the times what researchers will do if they're using surveys is they'll go for a waiver of documentation of consent. So essentially what this is a letter from you, the investigator. It talks about people's rights as research subjects, has all of the information, risks, benefits, stuff like that. But the subject doesn't actually have to sign. So you can use this letter, upload it to the front of a survey, and then collect data that way. And there's a template for this, and it's something that we deal with fairly regularly. So it's a way of not having to collect not having to have people sign if they're completing a survey. So one of the things that's important is please don't submit record reviews using this pathway. We do have record reviews that are exempt, but we also have a different path for it that kind of keeps that separate from exempt research that is going to be reaching out to subjects, again, things like surveys. So please don't submit your record reviews this way. For record reviews, you're going to want to look at data chart reviews. This is where you go for records, data, specimens. You can look at PHI with this review type, so it's a good way of getting access to retrospective data. We have two paths for this, exempt and expedited. And myIRB, when you fill out the SMART forms and you tell the system what you're doing, will help present you with the appropriate path. So it'll help give some guidance there. As a little bit of an overview of the differences between these, exempt research tends to be accessing data and tissues, which you can do with both. You can keep a link or a code to identifiers, but tissue samples is where things gets a little bit different. So you can do retrospective and prospective research with both of these, but there's just some differences in terms of whether or not things are identifiable, whether or not they're publicly available. And again, this is something that the SMART forms will help with, and staff can also help with you. Expedited research is the next category. So just as a general note, expedited is not the same thing as an urgent review. It's a little confusing just because of the way it's worded. It's expedited. Basically what we mean by expedited is it's not going to go to the full board. It doesn't mean that it's going to be reviewed right away much more quickly than everything else. It's still going to go through the normal process, but it's just not going to be heard by the full board. We do have ways of requesting urgent review if that's something that you need. And you can also contact IRB staff and we can help you out with that. But don't pick expedited just because it's something that needs to be done quickly. Expedited research is used for studies that have no more than minimal risk or minor changes in approved studies. So if you have a full board study and you're making a minor change, you're updating contact information on a flyer, or you're adding e-consent or something like that, that might be something that would be expedited. It's not necessarily, but usually if it's a small enough change, it'll go through the expedited route. Informed consent is typically required with expedited studies. However, you can request to waive consent or documentation of consent. If there's various circumstances in which it's either impractical to get it or it would cause other issues with the research, you can submit that. You'll just need to describe it and why you want to do it in your protocol, and then in the informed consent smart forms. And then the reviewer will decide whether or not that's something that's going to be appropriate for this type of study. Our investigator guidelines on expedited studies is a really good tool for this. So when you go down the expedited path, there's going to be 7 categories that you'll choose from. There are other categories for expedited review, but for a new study, these are the ones that you're going to see. And each of these has more information. There's more details under each of them, but for the purposes of a slide to just give you an idea of what you'll be looking at, these are kind of the basic categories. And it gives you a chance to sort of see whether or not your research is going to fall under an expedited category. So if you're trying to collect blood samples from people who are already getting a blood draw, that would probably fall under the expedited. It'd fall under expedited too. If you want to collect skin samples, if you want to say do a biopsy, that probably won't fall under the expedited category because it's a biopsy. It's not a non-invasive procedure since you're actually taking a sample from somebody. But this gives you kind of an idea of what expedited research looks like. Common expedited submissions include collecting samples for research, blood samples, biological samples, saliva, urine, stuff like that, things that don't require you to actually go into people and get it. And collecting data, so procedures that are used in clinical practice, something that's non-invasive, performing tasks that are little or no risk. So if you have healthy participants and you want to ask them to do something, you want to measure their walking speed, and there's no obstacles, everybody's healthy, everybody has a healthy gait, that would probably fall under expedited. Again, all of these are sort of general. The details are always where the different study types fall out. But again, staff and IRB reviewers will be able to help you sort this out if needed. So full board studies. If you have a study that is greater than minimal risk, it'll be heard by the full board. And the way we define minimal risk is if the risk posed by the research is greater than what's going to be encountered in daily life or during routine examinations. So if it's something that people might do anyway, if they get an email from Nielsen and they want to know what TV shows somebody's watching and you want to ask them about their media, that's probably minimal risk. People generally do that. They might do that in real life. But if it's something requiring a surgery, requiring a new drug, requiring some other treatment, then it's going to be greater than minimal risk and it'll need to be heard by the full board. And this is also something that's contextual. So IRB 02 is going to have a different set of what they consider greater than minimal risks. So if you're talking to somebody about political activism and they're in a situation where speaking out about it might have repercussions for their physical safety or their employment, or there's some sort of risk to them telling you what they're doing, that might be something that would be heard by the full board in IRB 02. So O1, we meet first and third Wednesdays of each month. IRB 02 meets Thursdays monthly. We have a schedule online and you'll be able to see exactly when. So common full board submissions. Again, if there's experimental medical procedures, drugs, devices, sensitive information, drug use, sexual abuse, or psychological procedures that could affect somebody's mental or emotional well-being, you'll probably need to go to the full board pathway, and you will likely need written informed consent. This is just something that is done to protect subjects who are going to be putting themselves at a little more risk. So some key points about full board studies. If you're doing biomedical research, one of the things that's really important for reviewers is what is standard of care versus what's a research only procedure. So reviewers, we have reviewers from all across the field. We have a lot of people with a lot of different knowledge, but ultimately in your subspecialty, you're going to be the expert. So we need you to describe, if somebody were just a patient of yours, what would be done to them versus if they're going to be enrolled in this study, what is the difference? And this helps determine what sort of risks are involved. So research only procedures are things that are going to be done to someone that wouldn't be done to them if they were just a patient. This can be something that is a little bit subtle. So if you have a patient who gets blood draws and they normally get 4 blood draws, and you want to get 6 blood draws because you want that extra blood to use for your research procedure, that is a research only procedure because they wouldn't normally have that much blood drawn. And again, as a way of protecting subjects and making sure that we know exactly what is happening to them, we would want you to kind of tease that out. Randomizing subjects, even if you have 2 things that are both very common, there is the possibility that somebody is going to be put in a group that they wouldn't be put in otherwise. So we would want to know about that. Or things like pregnancy tests. It's an extra procedure, something somebody wouldn't necessarily be doing otherwise. So describing this in the protocol is really key. It helps the reviewers understand and get that context that you're going to be the one who can provide because you're the expert on this. Banking. So this is something that is, it seems to be increasingly common. It's a nice resource. So if you are collecting, say, again, blood samples, and you're not going to use them all, and you're pretty sure you're not going to use them all, you want to save them for some later research question. You already have the data, you already have the sample, you're allowed to do that. You don't necessarily know what questions you're going to be asking, but you do know that you're going to want these samples or this data. You're allowed to collect that, you're allowed to keep it in a bank. So we have tissue banks, data banks, contact registries. Contact registries are something that a lot of people have started collecting. So if you have access to a group of subjects for your study and you think you might want to talk to them later, you can ask them to sign up for a contact registry. But in order to do this, you're going to need to submit a submission. So with the IRB here, we need you to submit this if it's going to be a local bank or a non-local bank that's not part of some other study. So again, you can collect these materials as part of a protocol. You just have to submit it as its own separate submission. This means that when you go through your protocol and you describe the banking process, generally what will happen is if there's a couple lines saying you're going to be banking in an associated study, that's fine. But all of the details about the banking itself should go in the banking only submission. And this helps keep it separate from the research study, because if you have a bank, you can have more than one study that feeds into it. And by putting all that information in the banking submission, when reviewers go to look at it, if you need to make revisions or reviewers have questions, it's all just right there. You are probably, you will need informed consent for banking studies. We have templates. We have a template for contact registry only. So it's a little bit shorter and it just specifically deals with contact registries. We have a consent addendum. So if you are adding it, it's a bank kept externally, you can add it to your ICF. And then our investigator guidelines. So there's a lot of resources to help make banking accessible and easy and useful. So those are the main study types, and I do want to touch briefly on revisions. So federal regulations require that if you have an IRB approved study and you want to make a change to it, you have to submit it to the IRB again. And the wording is no matter how minor. So even if you're updating 1 or 2 sentences on a recruitment flyer that you send out to people, this is something that you'll have to submit to the IRB for approval. And this is done because, again, depending on the context, little changes can actually have a big impact on subjects, on their well-being. And it just keeps your protocol and the processes that you're using at this time consistent with what we have. There is an exception to this though. If you have subjects who are an immediate hazard, if something is very dangerous and you need to change your study, we're not going to make you go through the revision process right now. That is something that we don't want to hold you up if you're trying to watch out for your subject's well-being, but you will be asked to report that later. So in submitting revisions, you're going to have a revision smart form. There's two big questions on there. There's several questions, but the first and the second one, describe the revision. We want to know specifically what you're changing. If you say we're updating our protocol, that does give the reviewer some information, but not as much as if you say we're updating our protocol because we're adding a new recruitment site, we have a new co-investigator, and we are switching out test A for test B because we found that both of them are working equally well, and one of the tests takes less time. So to make it easier for our subjects, we're switching that out. Then when the reviewer goes in to look at the modified study and look at your revision, they know exactly what to look for. So it's something that really helps move submissions, move revision submissions forward really quickly. The other one is question 2, which is justifying the change. So a lot of the times changes will be made to protocols, and it may be really obvious to you why you're making the change, but as the study goes through the system, as it accrues revisions over the years, that may not be very evident to future reviewers or to future people looking at the study. So telling us why you need to change it, again, gives us the context to make a decision. It'll tell the reviewer, this is why we want to do it. Because again, it might be very evident to you, but it may not be that evident to the reviewer. And it just gives that additional information to help them make a good call about it. We also deal with event reporting. This is also done in myIRB. So adverse events need to be reported within 5 days of the PI becoming aware of them. This is when they're serious and unexpected and related, or the relationship is more likely than not. We have guidelines of all of this that gives a lot more information and a lot more detail about what constitutes an adverse event. Major protocol deviations are another thing that would be reported, especially if there's any risk to the rights, welfare of the research subject, safety, integrity of the data. These are just things that we ask that you report. We keep track of it, and we help figure out what happened and work with you to figure out, is there a way of preventing something from happening again? Regulatory noncompliance is a big one. If there's something that's not right, if you know it's not right, it's your job to report it. It's your duty, especially if it's gonna impact subjects. So this is something that we ask for your help on, because we wanna make sure that everybody is safe, that the researchers are safe, that subjects are safe, and reporting noncompliance is a major way of doing that. So we have investigator guidelines on both of these, and they have a little bit more detail. And then we have continuing review and status reporting. So once your study is approved, that doesn't mean that you're done with us. You still have to check in. We want to see what's going on, whether anything's changed, how many people you've enrolled. So continuing review is something that happens generally once per year. We have a guideline on how to report enrollment, which is really helpful. Not every study has to come back to us every year. So minimal risk expedited studies typically submit a status report every 3 years. And if you have a study where you've been testing a drug, you've been testing a device, everybody's done with that particular part of the study, and all you're doing is looking at the data now, maybe collecting a little bit of follow-up information. Typically, once that goes to the full board, it can be moved to a status where it doesn't require the full review there. But this is something that's going to vary depending on the individual study. And then study closures. So we have a lot of studies floating through the system, and closing studies helps close the loop in terms of what you did, what kind of information you collected, and just letting us know you're done with this study. So it helps us keep track of what's being done at the university. And it's important. It's something that may not seem like it's as important, but it does help us monitor what's going on. And it also has implications for retaining research data when you need to destroy data, when you can get rid of things. So submitting study closures is really important. And we have information about how long you need to save data, what you need to do with your informed consent forms. You can find all of that at these links. So now I want to talk a little bit about some general tips for writing strong submissions that really give all of the information needed to the reviewers. So protocols are a good place to start. So your protocol document or a study description, depending on the type of review that you're going for, it's something that's required. We need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, we can't really evaluate it. So we have templates, we have guidelines that will help tease out the key elements. There's a couple things that are really jump out and are important to go through when you submit your protocol. So we need to know your recruitment strategy. We need to know where you're going to be finding these subjects, how you're going to be getting in touch with them. And then, if you're recruiting from another protocol, if you're recruiting from the public, so spend a little bit of time with the recruitment strategy. It also just helps in terms of laying out the specific process by which subjects will go through. And we do have smart forms that ask about this, but it's always good to have a lot of detail in the protocol. And then the study procedures. So when you do research studies, I mean, at least on the studies that I've been on, again, if you're doing it every day, if you're deep into it every day, it can seem pretty obvious what the pathway through the study is and what needs to be done. But you need to be writing protocols for somebody who is not in that situation. So describe the study procedures really clearly, make sure that you're going through all the steps. And again, this is just because reviewers see a lot of studies and they don't have all of the background on your particular study that you do. So it really helps them if you can be detailed on this. The same thing with project feasibility, especially if there's going to be any risk involved to subjects, making sure that the project is going to has all of the elements that that are needed. It's a good way of making sure the review goes quickly. Next up is informed consent. So this is probably one of the most important things that you'll do. If we're asking research subjects to give us their time, if we're asking them to do things for us, procedures, take experimental drugs, take our surveys, we owe it to them to let them know what they're getting themselves into. So we ask that you get informed consent. We have templates for IRB 01 and IRB 02. We have templates for a variety of different types of studies and situations. And using that, you'll be able to fill it out and you'll have a lot of the guts, a lot of the meat that really needs to be in every submission. So they're a really good resource. We also ask that you write documents at an 8th grade reading level. We have a glossary of medical terms that can be helpful for that. But this is, again, just because subjects don't have the same background as you, and things that may seem obvious when you explain it to one of your colleagues may not be obvious to a subject. So we want to make sure they know specifically what they're getting into. And then the consenting process is really important. So we need to know who's getting informed consent so that we're sure whoever it is has all of the information in the background needed to answer any questions that might come up. We want to know where people are being consented. Are you going to consent them at a regular clinical meeting or at the library right before you start an interview or right before they go into surgery? Again, because this gives context into how people are going to be able to make a decision. And then a really important one is how you're going to get consent. So are you going to be calling people or using Zoom? Are you going to use REDCap e-consent? There's procedures and ways to do all of these things, but describing specifically how each subject population is going to be consented is a way of making sure that the reviewer knows what you're doing and can make a call. And then if there's anything that needs adjustment, they'll be able to help you. Next up is submitting documents. So we ask that you submit Word documents as opposed to PDFs. We do this for a couple of reasons. They're easily edited, which is a bonus in terms of if staff have comments that they want to put on there, or if somebody, one of the reviewers notices something that needs to be changed, they can just put it in there and then you'll be able to see it. And it really facilitates that sharing of info. We ask that you use track changes for updates. And again, this is because we see a lot of studies. So track changes lets us go through the document, and especially on long protocols, we can just click through and see exactly what's been changed and where it's situated within the protocol. It gives us that context. Other things with documents, any and all materials that subjects are going to see or hear, we need to approve that. So that's your recruitment flyers. If you're making phone calls, phone scripts, if you're sending emails, templates for that. All of these things that your subjects are going to see, we need to review those, again, just to make sure that everything's in compliance. And then the last one is, please double check your uploads before submitting materials. This is just a general good practice. I know I've done it. You think you're uploading one thing and you upload something else, or you save something and you think this document's ready to go, but it's saved funny, your computer glitched. And then it's not, it doesn't look the way it needs to. So it's good to just double check that to make sure that everything is in order. The smart forms. So the big thing about smart forms is consistency. There's a lot of details here, but consistency is sort of the biggest part of it. So making sure that your protocol and your ICF are consistent. If your protocol says that people are going to be doing a survey that's going to take them 20 minutes, and your informed consent document says it will take 30 to 40 minutes, well, we don't really know which one of those is true. So making sure that they line up is a way of creating a good picture of the study that can be easily evaluated. So across smart forms is really important, across documents. And then the enrollment details, subject descriptions. These are ones where, especially if people modify the protocol, if you're submitting a revision, they can be easy to forget because they're not on that main protocol page. But going through and making sure that you're updating those means that whoever looks at the study next, if you submit another revision or a continuing review, they know exactly what's going on. And we have myIRB acceptability standards. So this will give you an idea of what we're looking at. We can always send something back to you if it's missing information that we need, but to save everybody time and make sure that you can get back to research as soon as possible, we prefer to just have all of the information up front. So the acceptability standards really help with that. So how do you monitor your study in myIRB? So when you go into the study, when you log into the system and you've created a study, you've submitted it to us, you'll always be able to check on it. This little box on the upper left-hand corner tells you where it is within our particular process, which, to give you a bit more information about that, as soon as you submit your study to us, we start our review process. First off, it goes to IRB staff. They pre-review the study. You may get questions from pre-review. This is especially a place to catch sort of bigger problems with a study. So if you submitted something as exempt and it probably should be expedited, if there's a pretty good indication that that's not the right review type, we'll send the study back and we'll send a note to you and ask you to change it. And then it'll go to the reviewer for additional comments. So especially with regulatory issues, documents, formatting, templates, whether or not your ICF has all the standard language, pre-review is really where that stuff gets hammered out. After pre-review, it will go to a reviewer, so exempt, expedited, or assigned to an IRB meeting. Once these things happen, that means that the reviewer themselves has actually seen the study and they're working through it. So if it's assigned to an IRB meeting, you'll have information about when and where it's assigned. The IRB meetings are a good place to come and hear what the reviewers have to say about your study, answer questions, ask questions. It's a great place to get that feedback. But if you have something that's already been assigned to the IRB meeting and you need to make a change, you'll just have to contact us. We'll pull it from the agenda, we'll push it back to you, and you'll be able to make your edits and go on. Usually if something's in review, if it's assigned to a reviewer or a meeting, you're not going to be able to make changes. Again, just because we want to make sure that the reviewer is looking at the more or less the final version of the submission. And then awaiting correspondence. And that just means that the study is good to go, but our approval team is at work making the documents. They're stamping ICFs, stamping flyers, writing the approval letter. So they go through, they take care of that, and they get that back to you. It's really important, though, that you don't start your research until you have that letter in your hand. It's just a matter of you need to receive final confirmation that everything is good to go before you're allowed to start. So throughout the process, you will likely see some reviewer notes. This is either requesting more information, requesting changes, requesting clarification. And these are responded to within the myIRB system. So you'll go through and you'll see these different changes requested. You edit the study to see that. Sometimes you'll have to edit the smart forms themselves. Sometimes you won't. That'll be made clear through the comments that you see. One of the things that's really important is if you write in this little response box, here's how we're going to clarify our recruitment process. We are sending a flyer first, and then we're making a phone call, and then we're sending an email. If you put it in that box, it doesn't necessarily show up in later reviews. We do have access to it, but it's much easier and much smoother to make those changes in the smart forms or in your documents themselves. And again, this is in case you need to make another revision rather than needing to go through and dig back and figure out what specifically is changed and what you're doing now. You can just the reviewer can just go ahead and look at the smart forms and it'll have all the most accurate, up-to-date information. So please make sure that if there's big changes, you actually make them in the smart form or in the documents. So a couple little tricks for going through this. If you click on this button at the top that says Hide Show Errors, you'll be able to see more specifically what smart forms need your attention. So there's a lot of smart forms, there's a lot of questions that we asked you to respond to. And this is a way of having them all pop up. You can jump to the individual form so you don't have to look back and forth. It'll tell you exactly what needs to be changed, and you can just jump there and make that correction. So it's a really nice way of viewing the specific things that we're asking you to change or clarify. There's also the reviewer notes, the previous and next buttons. Those two will take you through the process of finding reviewer notes so that you can respond to them. So again, responding to reviewer notes, the history tab will have any documents or reviewer comments that are attached, and you'll need to download those documents and reply to the comments before you resubmit. So we have a lot of resources. Our website has a ton of different stuff that can help answer questions. We're always happy to answer questions. We have a listserv, a newsletter. You can sign up for those to get information directly from us. If you need to talk to us, you can email us. But the website has a lot of information that can be really helpful when you're going through and setting up a submission. So the investigator guidelines have various regulatory policies, IRB policies. You can look them all up. We have a bunch of them based on various subjects. Quality improvement versus research. This is another one that can be not tricky, but can be a little subtle. So if you're doing a quality improvement project, and the specific definition of that is going to be in that guideline, quality improvement projects may not require IRB review. So you may not need to talk to us at all. This quality improvement project registry, you can go through, there's a questionnaire, and you fill that out, and that website will tell you exactly whether or not your project is classified as quality improvement. You can print that certificate and you're good to go. Alphabetical listing of forms that has all the information, things that need to be included in ICF's various paperwork. We have resources for single IRB, SIRB submissions. We have documentation tools. There's a ton of stuff on the website, so I do recommend that you go and check it out. And you may be able to find some things that can make the process a little easier. So at that point, I want to open it up for questions. So are there any questions? Oh, say something in the chat. Thank you. Yeah, if there's any questions, let me know. Okay, how do we know what consent forms to use? Brief ICF and full ICF. That's a really good question. So for IRB 1 biomedical research, we have we have a variety of different forms. We have a brief ICF and a full ICF. And those are two different documents. So the full informed consent is generally going to be used for something that is more involved. So if you are giving somebody studied drugs, or you're doing research and you're using medical devices, if there's more risk, or if it's a variety of different things, you have someone coming in for blood draws, and they're going to do that 3 different times. And then they fill out 3 surveys, and then they come in and they are, you analyze, you do an MRI or a screening or something. If it's something that's going to be a little bit more complicated, the full ICF is the way you want to go. The brief ICF is for something that is a little bit more simple. So if all you need somebody to do is provide a saliva sample and fill out a 10-question questionnaire, you can use the brief ICF. And it just cuts out the number of questions that you need to respond to, makes it a little bit easier for subjects to process and also for you to create initially. So a good rule of thumb there is if the full ICF, if you find yourself repeating what you're saying, risks and benefits, and then risks and benefits, and then if you find yourself putting a lot of the same information in multiple places, you might want to check out the brief informed consent form. Again, just because if the study is simpler, not necessarily in content, but in what you need subjects to do, it's a good way of sort of cutting that down. And that's another thing, that when you submit, IRB staff and reviewers will be able to help you with that. So as we go through the studies, we may suggest, you can use the brief ICF for that. That might be easier for you and your subjects. So it's something that we'll help with. And again, you can always reach out if you need clarification or questions. We'll be able to probably point you in the right direction. It's not necessarily, sometimes without seeing the entire protocol, it can be more difficult, but we'll be able to at least get you going in the right way. Do we have any other questions? All right, well, if there's nothing else, we will go ahead and close out here. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming and joining us. Again, here's my contact information. I'm also in the staff registry on the myIRB website. We're always happy to answer questions. We want to make sure that your study can be approved and that it can be approved and get through the process quickly. We want to make sure that you can get back to doing the research that's so important. So reach out. We will do what we can. We'll work with you. We'll figure it out. So.
Lauren, you had one question pop in just now.
Oh, okay.
Someone was asking where they are going to be able to find this recording.
Okay, this recording is going to be on our website. It will be under the education tab. So there'll be some resources at the bottom of education, and it'll just be put up there. The slides will be up there, and then the recording will be up there too.
Thank you.
Yep. All right.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Oh, okay.
Are you planning on giving a similar talk sometime after July?
Yeah, I mean, these will be something that's repeated fairly frequently. The newsletter will have it, but if you have a specific date or a specific question, just send me an email and we'll be able to, we can talk about what might be a good solution.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And I hope you have a really nice rest of your afternoon.